Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Shawn Fain is the boss of United Auto Workers. He was on Face the Nation over the weekend to respond to the Trump tariffs on foreign autos. And boy, is this the same Shawn Fain that I heard during the 2024 presidential campaign? This is what Shawn Fain had to say.
It's spot on. Look, we have a situation right now where 2,000 workers were laid off this past year. They built the Ram truck there for years under Stellantis, and Stellantis made a decision to shift that production to Mexico. They could shift that work back in very short order and be producing Ram trucks right back there and put those people back to work. They're in a situation where they need to build a new plant. Yeah, that's going to take a couple years, but there is plenty of opportunity for these companies to do the right thing and bring work back here overnight, just as quick as they shipped it out of here.
How do tariffs make that happen? What is the relationship between a 20 or 25% tariff and getting that capacity back up to where you'd like to see it?
Well, because like everything, the companies abuse the process. I mean, they're in the pursuit of driving a race to the bottom. I mean, the tariffs are, there was a major promise when NAFTA, we go back to when NAFTA happened in 1992, the big debate, and Ross Perot talked about the giant sucking sound that our manufacturing base was going to disappear. He was spot on, and we saw what happened in the ensuing 30 years. We've seen 90,000 plants leave. Like I said, we've seen 65 plants in the big three close. Look, right now, as we speak, in Wisconsin, we have a Deere plant threatening to be closed, and their work being threatened to go to Mexico. We have a heavy truck plant at Freightliner, Volvo, and Mack Truck in Pennsylvania being threatened to be taken to Mexico. There is plenty of opportunity, and I've had companies tell us point blank that they're going to have to bring product back here if those tariffs are implemented.
Fain arguing that U.S. auto plants are at about 60% capacity right now, so they have excess capacity. So onshoring more of the work is not something that would require building new capacity. It could happen fairly quickly, and the resulting benefits in terms of job creation. I love the reference to companies are in a race to the bottom, as opposed to a race to the bottom line.
Right.
Something that Shawn Fain doesn't have much respect for. He's really an obnoxious figure, Shawn Fain. So I don't know how comfortable you are with these sorts of bedfellows. I know politics makes strange ones, but this is Shawn Fain last year on the campaign trail on President Trump.
Donald Trump is a scab. Donald Trump is a billionaire, and that's who he represents. If Donald Trump ever worked in an auto plant, he wouldn't be a UAW member. He'd be a company man trying to squeeze the American worker. Donald Trump stands against everything we stand for as a union, as a society. When you go back to our core issues, wages, retirement, health care, and our time, that's what this election's about. This election's about who will stand up with us and who will stand in our way. Those are the questions that will win or lose this election and will decide our fate. Those are the questions that will determine the future of our country and the fate of the working class.
And Trump was on the wrong side of that history, according to Shawn Fain back then. but it's all smiles now. 312-642-5600, turnkey.pro answer line. He's a toady of the billionaire class, of which he is one, said Sean Fain. Kamala Harris, friend of the working man.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And it really didn't matter. This was interesting, too. I mean, you may remember we discussed it. Sean Fain, when he was on with Neil Cavuto last year, conceded that most of his members were with Trump, and that didn't matter much to him either.
A great majority of our members will not vote for President Biden. Yes, some will. But that's the reality of this. The majority of our members are going to vote their paychecks. They're going to vote for an economy that works for them, and they're going to vote for a president. When you look at these two presidents, the choice is very clear about which one stands up with the working class and stands up for labor, and which one stands for the billionaire class, and that's his base.
We shall watch very closely.
Yeah, the billionaires are his base. Huh.
Interesting.
Well,
Talking out of both sides of his mouth, isn't he?
I mean, union bosses generally, like politicians, I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy there because they're always just posturing for their immediate interests, which lends itself to expediency rather than principled conduct. They suggest they're always principled, always looking to get the best for their members, and yet is that really Sean Fain's discernible approach? It doesn't seem to me that it is. For more on this and reaction to a market outlook that is very much opaque at this point, please be joined by Scott the Cow Guy Shellady. Yeah, that means Scott's here. Scott, of course, is a market specialist for Market Day Report, 10:30 to 1, and the Cow Guy Close. He hosts 1 to 1:30, both at RFD TV. Scott, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thanks for waiting for me. Appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
No.
So Sean Fain, auto plants have 60% excess capacity. The tariffs on foreign cars, good for bringing work back to the big three. We can more than handle the work. We can add more jobs, and that means better economic times for auto workers and for America by extension, so it's all good. Yes?
Well, yeah. Well, it's good for auto workers, yeah, but not doesn't mean it's good for everybody in the country. I would say, it's nice to want to put this big manufacturing push through, but I would also like to see some other pushes through. And also, I really think that the president needs to get on and do some more messaging, because I think people are now starting to get nervous, and he's running out of political goodwill capital here in the short term. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to help the union members. But you know what? Look at the numbers for the union. Since 1940, that they're all-time record lows, or at least close to it, bumping off the bottom. I like, don't get me wrong, I like the unions. I've got a house in Portage, Indiana. But at the same time, there's a lot of folks out there that have 401ks. There's a lot of people out there that are worried about what's happening to their stock portfolios. So I think that what needs to be, happening is the president needs to, like he has done a great job of messaging what DOGE is uncovering. He needs to message what other countries are tariffing our goods and services at, and hopefully that gets across to people that, hey, we have been getting ripped off for a long time here. We can't have the status quo. We can't continue business as usual. It's going to be rough in the short term here, but ultimately down the road, it should pay off.
So you think some contextual communication from the president would tamp down some of the fears and at least dull the blade in terms of the sell-off?
Yeah, 100%. I think the messaging needs to be stronger. I do, because a lot of people don't know how much we're getting ripped off abroad, and it's until you go to London to try to buy a Maker's Mark and see how expensive it is, then you start to realize and wake up. And not that that's happened to me a few times, but
no, you're right.
So you're
describing it as an economist, of course. Yes.
Yeah, right. And so I think because they have done a pretty good job with DOGE, but they need to do the same job with tariffs, and they don't. And so he's just coming out saying 10% this, 25% that. I mean, look, our economy is $30 trillion a year. Okay, that's about the size of our U.S. economy, and we're only talking about tariffing about $1 trillion of the $30 trillion. And of that tariff, it's on average between 10 and 15%, maybe a little bit more on average. So, I mean, in the scheme of things, you've got a lot of people just nervous. This market sell-off is because I think of more nerves than actual, real spikes. Because when you look at the numbers and the size of what we're tariffing versus our own economy, it's not as horrible as people might want to feel like. And I'll tell you right now, Dan, we need to worry more about inflation than we do tariffs.
Right, but Trump's do you think Trump's focusing on that? Because I just feel like it's all about tariffs right now.
Additionally, I mean, taxes, which is what tariffs are, increase prices. I mean, isn't that? I mean, when you talk about worrying about inflation more than tariffs, I mean, the two are inextricably linked.
They can be, but they don't have to be. A tax is something you have to pay. You don't have to pay a tariff if you want to buy a car. You don't have to pay the one that's now $10,000 more. You can go buy a U.S. car for the same price as it was last year.
But that's wait a second, hold on a second, because this is an important part too. Because once you start, down the road of central planning, it begets more central planning. Trump's message to U.S. auto workers is, "Don't you dare raise your prices," because of course, if you're increasing the price of a competitive vehicle by 10,000, maybe we should bump ours up by 8 because it's still cheaper. And he says, "You better not do that." So now we have, sort of de facto or rhetorical price controls. The message being sent to domestic producers. So it is inflationary if you don't abide the president's wishes.
I'll still stand by. It could be inflationary, yes, and initially they will be, but until things settle down a little bit, when you can find an alternative, or sometimes along that supply chain, Dan, you know this. China in 2017, they paid for 100% of the tariff because they didn't want to lose the supply chain going to say Vietnam or India, because it would, a lot of it wouldn't come back.
Right.
So there are a lot of things. There are a lot of unintended consequences with tariffs that we don't know about. That a lot of times those things get sucked up by people along the way. So that when it finally does get to the U.S. consumer, it's nowhere near like it would have been had nobody done their job in the meantime. So I think they can be inflationary, but I think that's a little bit more of a boogeyman than it is an actual fact.
Then speak to your perspective on the inflation concern.
Well, we had PPI and CPI come out a week or two ago. They were a little hotter than expected. We had the Fed's gauge of inflation, the personal consumption expenditure, which came out Friday, which was a little hotter than expected. I still think that they haven't put that genie back in the bottle yet, and I think it's going to be pretty difficult, especially with Jay Powell at the helm. And then if you have some of these things like you're going to get a Doge check or money gets poured back into the system, I just feel as though that we have more to worry about when it comes to inflation than tariffs. Because tariffs, I don't think a lot of them have been there a while, but I don't think they're all going to last for a significant period of time. I do believe some of them are going to be. I do believe that some of them are going to be a bargaining chip. I do think that that's what he's got in mind there. I don't think he's going to do it forever. But I do also know one thing, folks. You can't have the way the status quo ain't going to go. We can't continue to do business like we have done over the last, 50, 60 years, especially over the last 10 years.
Right, but I think...
Go ahead.
No, I think the controlling expectations issue that you spoke about at the outset of our conversation is an important one. What the time horizon is, because it seems like it's a little bit open-ended right now, and that makes people nervous. They don't know how much they're going to have to endure, how much of a storm they're going to have to endure for how long. I'm going to get you to adjudicate a seeming difference of perspectives from a couple of our contributors in this space, along with yourself. Jim Urio, we talked to, is throwing around the R word for later this year, recession. Jim Perry, on the other hand, this was his market outlook as released last evening. Take a listen.
Investor sentiment has shifted very negatively. We've got $36 trillion worth of debt. That debt has risen by 40% in the last 4 years. The budget deficit has quadrupled in the last 4 years. And with respect to tariffs and trade, everybody has to remember that 90% of that trade deficit comes from just 10 countries, okay? On the top of the list, of course, is China. Our deficit with them is $300 billion. With Europe, it's a deficit of $200 billion. With Mexico, it's about $175. And fourth is Vietnam with $125. Trump wants balanced trade with every single one of those nations. He believes he can get to a balanced trade figure in 18 months. We'll see. It's going to be hard. As far as spending is concerned, the government spent $7 trillion last year. At least 10% of that, $700 billion, was allocated out from the government to the economy fraudulently and wastefully. I think that $700 billion reduction is easily attainable. It's not going to be pleasant for everybody, but at the end of the day, the economy is going to do better. Less money in the public sector and into the private sector means inflationary pressures go down and productivity goes up. So yes, I think the economy is in pretty good shape. I think you're going to see corporate profitability come in the first quarter at about 10%. That's pretty good. And I think that the GDP, maybe not this quarter, but certainly by the end of the year, should be running at about 2.5% or 3% again. If we do that, the stock market's going to rally, and corporate profitability is going to go up. Consumer spending is going to keep going because the labor market's growing and wages are growing faster than inflation. So stick with it. I think recognize that there's a case for optimism here. It's going to be bumpy, but I do think that if you save a little money in reserve and put some money into the market in the next quarter at a little bit of a lower level or right around here, I think you'll see by the end of the year the stock market's going to be up and investor portfolios are going to be feeling pretty good. Okay?
What say you? Yurio's talking about negative growth, and Jim's talking about 2.53% GDP growth by third or fourth quarter.
I think over the last 3 or 4 years we've been in a recession, absolutely. And I think that I think that we'll slowly but surely be able to come out of it with the things that the second guest had to say there. I do feel as though that the government has spent so much money and hired so many people over the last 3 or 4 years, they've masked over the fact that we've had negative GDPs. We had two quarters in a row of negative GDPs in 2022. We tried to say it was a recession. The government tried to change the definition of a recession. But one thing the government couldn't do is change how you felt. So those people then voted Trump in last November because of how they felt, and they were right. And I think that because of the government spending masking over the recession, when you slowly but surely start to take that away, I think that he needs to also get out in front of the fact of saying we might have a negative quarter or two here before we get this ship turned around. That's what I would do. Those two things. Message better on tariffs and message better on the fact that we might have a couple of negative quarters in a row here while we get this thing turned around. But in the end, it'll be okay. So I'm halfway in between Yurio and that second guess.
Okay. Scott the Cow Guy. Shellady's splitting the baby. Market specialist for Market Day Report, 10:30 to 1. Host of the Cow Guy Close, 1 to 1:30, both at RFD TV. Thanks, Scott.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
This is an urgent announcement for anyone that's $10,000 or more in debt. This new year, get out of debt now. There are special programs that can completely free you of your debt. Total Financial Freedom can help you